of the Readiness Subcommittee to order. I've got to do the boilerplate, so stand by. I'll do it as quickly as I possibly can. I'd like to welcome the members who are joining today's markup remotely. Those members are reminded that they must be visible on screen within the software platform for the purposes of identifying verification when joining the proceeding, establishing and maintaining a quorum, participating in the proceeding, and voting. Members participating remotely must continue to use the software platform video function while attending the proceedings unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. That does not mean hit the mute button or the do not or the video button. Keep it on. If a member who is participating remotely experiences technical difficulties, please contact the committee staff for assistance, and you have a reasonable chance of getting help and reconnected. When recognized video of remotely attending members' participation will be broadcast in the room via the television internet feeds. Members participating remotely are asked to mute their microphone when they are not speaking. Mute your microphone when you are not speaking. We'll say that several times during the meeting. Members participating remotely will be recognized normally for asking questions, but if they want to speak at another time, they must seek recognition verbally. In all cases, members are reminded to unmute their microphone prior to speaking. Members should be aware that there is a slight lag of a few seconds between the time you start speaking and the camera shot switching to you. Members who are participating remotely are reminded to keep the software platform's video function on for the entirety of the time they attend the proceedings. That's the third time I've said that. These members may leave and rejoin the proceeding. If members depart for a short period for reasons other than joining a different proceeding, they should leave the video function on so that we can see the room in which you are sitting or were sitting. If members will be absent for a significant period or depart to join a different proceeding, they should exit the software platform entirely and then rejoin it if they return. Members are also advised that I have designated a committee staff to, if necessary, mute unrecognized members' microphones to cancel any inadvertent background noise that may disrupt the proceeding, or if you intend to disrupt the proceeding, we'll mute you. Members may use the software platform's chat feature to communicate with staff members regarding technical or logistical support issues only. Finally, remotely participating members should see a 5-minute countdown clock on the software platform's display, but if necessary, I will remind the members that their time is up. Doug, did I complete my work? Thank you, Doug. Now, following this meeting and before the next meeting, we will ask all of the members participating in the hearing to repeat verbatim what I have written because you've heard it enough times to have memorized it. Okay, deep breath and move on to the real hearing. With these administrative remarks out of the way, I move on to the substance of the hearing. The scourge of contamination from PFAS and PFOA and other perfluorinated compounds is being experienced by communities across the country and indeed around the world. Our constituents are worried. They are afraid that they are being poisoned by their drinking water, or the PFAS is going to contaminate their livestock or produce and impact their ability to earn a living and support their families. This is not a partisan issue. Communities in my district surrounding Travis and Beale Air Force Base are dealing with DoD-originated PFAS contamination and the fear and anxiety that go with not knowing what that means for their health or how long they will have to wait for polluters, in this case the military, to clean up the contamination. I know that many members of this committee on both sides of the aisle represent communities with similar concerns. While the task of addressing PFAS contamination must eventually fall on all polluters, this committee's mandate is to ensure that the Department of Defense is acting to address its legacy of contamination. The department must keep faith with communities that host its installations and that are now being asked to shoulder this contamination burden. With this history in mind, we have required DoD to phase out AFFF, by 2024. This is the firefighting foam. We are not blind to the enormity of this task, but with the focus provided by a looming deadline, we are confident that with the Department's resources, they can find a solution that protects both our communities and the air crews and shipmates who rely upon the protection currently provided by AFFF. We are confident this year's NDAA also aims to increase the transparency by requiring the Department of Defense to publish on a public website the results of drinking water and groundwater testing conducted on military installations or former defense sites, and to notify the Congressional Defense Committees when there has been an uncontrolled release of PFAS-containing firefighting agents. We also established a prize program to incentivize research into viable replacement agents and authorized additional funding for cleanup and research into PFAS disposal technologies. Now, I look forward to this hearing from the witnesses about the Department's ongoing efforts to develop solutions to the myriad of problems presented by these forever chemicals, and how the Department is implementing the requirements of the fiscal year 20 NDAA to address the Department's PFAS legacy impacts on human health and the environment. With that, Mr. Lamborn, I believe you are remote. So, Doug, it's your turn. Welcome, and thank you for joining us remotely.
Mr. Brooks is going to cover.
Pardon?
Mr. Brooks is going to cover those.
Well, Doug, you're not with us.
Yo, over here.
Mr. Brooks, I understand you're the stand-in?
I am the stand-in.
So it's all yours.
Thank you, Chairman Garamendi. My remarks will be very brief. Ranking Member Lamborn and many of our GOP members are at a signing ceremony for the Abraham Accords at the White House and should be joining us shortly. I thank our witnesses for their testimony. You, not me, are who we want to hear from today. So with that, I conclude my remarks with, let's get to it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Without objection, the remarks of Mr. Lamborn or other members that are not with us at the moment will be entered into the record. So ordered. Let me introduce our witnesses. First, Maureen Sullivan, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Environment. You have a fascinating record, some 40 years of participation in environmental issues at the department. You and I were having a conversation earlier. I think we may have worked together in the late 90s in the run-up to the Kyoto Climate Conference. Also joining us is Dr. Herb Nelson, Director of Strategic Environmental Research and Development Program and Environmental Security Technology Certification Program. I understand that Dr. Rausch will not be able to join us. The edict coming from the White House is that all witnesses must testify in person, and Dr. Rausch has a health problem which prevents him from venturing out into such contaminated places as the House of Representatives hearing room and will not be joining us. I want to make it very, very clear that this committee leadership believes that that requirement from the White House is incorrect. It denies the Congress the opportunity to obtain valuable information. Dr. Rausch has a specific task as the Assistant Secretary of Health Readiness, Policy, and Oversight. We will not be able to have his testimony today. However, we do have his written testimony, and without objection, that will be entered into the congressional record. Hearing no objections, so ordered. So let us move on. One more thing before I move on to the testimony of Ms. Sullivan. I want to say happy birthday to Dr. Nelson. It is your birthday today. Thank you for coming across the river and joining us, Doctor. We'll await your testimony. Ms. Sullivan, you go first.
Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Lamborn, Mr. Brooks, sir.
and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I am Maureen Sullivan, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Environment. My portfolio includes policy and oversight of DoD's programs to comply with environmental laws, such as the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, CERCLA. I want to thank this subcommittee for the opportunity to discuss per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. We believe DoD has been leading the way to address these substances. Over the last 4 years, DoD has committed substantial resources and taken action to respond to concerns with PFAS. In July 2019, as one of his first actions, Secretary Esper stood up a task force to provide strategic leadership and direction to ensure a coordinated, aggressive, holistic approach on DoD-wide efforts to proactively address PFAS. CERCLA provides a consistent approach across the nation for cleanup. DoD, like other federal agencies, is specifically authorized under CERCLA Section 104 to take actions to address pollutants or contaminants, like PFAS, regardless of a CERCLA hazardous substance designation. DoD's priority is to quickly address PFAS and PFOA in drinking water above EPA's lifetime health advisory, where DoD is a known source. DoD actions are consistent with EPA recommendations. DoD prioritizes sites for action using the longstanding CERCLA risk-based process, worst first. These known or suspected PFAS release areas are in various stages of assessment, investigation, and cleanup. To prevent further releases to the environment, DoD limits the use of aqueous film-forming foam, AFFF, to responses to emergency events and no longer uses it for land-based testing and training. The Department treats each release of AFFF as a spill response. Currently available AFFF meets the military specification, contains PFAS, but does not contain PFAS or PFOA above the 800 parts per billion limit of quantitation. None of the commercially available PFAS-free foams meet DoD's strict safety standards. The Department is working aggressively to meet the requirements of the fiscal year 2020 NDAA related to AFFF. However, this is a formidable task. There are many circumstances where we use AFFF, so we have been identifying those situations and evaluating what needs to be done. We have an inventory of facilities with installed AFFF systems. Our fire protection engineers are documenting the viable options and criteria per facility type, determining the best approaches, and developing funding requirements and implementation schedules. The Department has identified over 200 airports, active reserve and National Guard, that are joint or use airports. These airports have a mixture of emergency response services, with almost all currently using AFFF. We are partnering with the Federal Aviation Administration to ensure that these airports, ours and the commercial airports, maintain the current level of protection for passengers, crews, and equipment. It is important to note that mutual aid is a cornerstone of fire and emergency services. Providing mutual aid can involve the use of AFFF. These emergencies range beyond aircraft crashes to include overturned vehicles, large industrial fires, or large structural fires. We need to maintain these levels of firefighting support and understand the feasibility of using alternative foams in the future. In summary, DoD is taking actions to reduce the risks of PFAS. Our efforts reinforce DoD's commitment to meeting critical mission requirements while protecting human health and the environment. DoD recognizes that this is a national challenge involving a wide array of industries, commercial applications, as well as many federal and state agencies. Therefore, it needs a nationwide solution. We look forward to working with you as you move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Your written testimony provides a lot more detail. I bring that to the attention of committee members and the general public. I'll repeat that. Thank you for your testimony. It is very complete. Your written testimony provides even more detail, and I would advise members of the public who are interested to look at your written testimony. There will be questions, of course. Dr. Nelson.
Chairman Garamendi, Mr. Brooks, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. So as the chairman said, my name is Herb Nelson. I'm the director of DOD's Strategic Environmental Research and Development Program, which often is called CERDP. That's executed in partnership with the Department of Energy and the EPA, and also the director of the Environmental Security Technology Certification Program, which is often called ESTCP, because there's no real good way to say that acronym. So these are DOD's environmental research, development, and demonstration programs, and our mission is to improve DOD's environmental performance, reduce cost, and enhance and sustain mission capabilities. I'd like to thank Congress for the many years of very generous support for these programs, and I'd like to thank this subcommittee for the opportunity to discuss the PFAS and AFFF problem that we're going to talk about today. CERDP and ESTCP are leading DOD's R&D response to these issues, and we do that through funding individual research projects that are led by academics, people in industry, people at DOD laboratories, and other federal agencies. These projects range from small-scale laboratory studies up to large-scale, almost pilot-scale demonstrations at DOD facilities. So we span the gamut from basic research through almost operational scale. CERDP initiated research into the fate, transport, and remediation of PFAS and PFOA shortly after the EPA released its Provisional Health Advisory in 2009. It became clear pretty early on in this that this was a much more complex problem than many of the contaminants that we've dealt with in the past. So our research program has expanded into really 4 areas, covering all of the scope of PFAS. That is sampling and analysis, fate, transport, and characterization of the compounds themselves, ecotoxicity of these compounds, and remediation, of course. The goal at the end, of course, is remediation. Similarly, in the AFFF area, we have a 4-prong line of approach to that also. We're looking to develop new PFAS-free formulations. We're looking to demonstrate the performance of both commercially available and developmental formulations in large-scale tests, where we can really document the performance of PFAS-free materials. We're also looking at the ecotoxicity of these potential replacement compounds. And finally, one that maybe is a little less well thought of, we're looking at strategies for cleaning out the firefighting hardware. If we change over to a PFAS-free material, we obviously have to get it cleaned up in the hardware so we don't have to bear the price of replacing all the hardware. All of these efforts that we're working on are coordinated closely with our colleagues in the military departments, the EPA, FAA, NASA, and also a number of international partners. And we do this through twice-yearly program reviews for each of these projects and periodic workshops where we all get together and talk about the issues. So in summary, I think we've established a wide-ranging research and development program. We're confident that the CERDP-supported research and development will make a significant contribution to the solution of this problem that's a national problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Normally, questions would go to, for my opportunity first, followed by Mr. Lamborn. I don't know if, Mr. Brooks, you want to take up questions or you want to wait Mr. Lamborn's arrival?
I am happy to go ahead and get my questions in.
Why don't you
chair's
do
permission.
that? Before you do that, I'm going to yield my questions to Ms. Slotkin, and she can take my time, and when her time eventually arrives, I'll take my turn then. Ms. Slotkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses for being here. You know from our previous meetings that there's a lot of us who care a lot about this issue, and I know that puts you in a tough spot because you're trying to navigate between the Department of Defense, where I used to work, and the communities that are really dealing with this problem. I represent a community that has a number of PFAS contamination sites. People can't eat the fish from the rivers. They can't let their dogs or their children touch the foam that's coming up on their beachfront property, and they're concerned about their drinking water. So it's something that's pretty serious for our community. And in our last NDAA, we were able to past 6 provisions on PFAS that the chairman went through. The question I have is on an issue we've discussed, Ms. Sullivan, about adhering to the strictest possible standard when it comes to cleanup, state versus federal. And in our state, we just promulgated a new, more stringent standard, which is quite different from the EPA standards. And I know when we talked, when you were generous enough to come to my office about your concerns about that provision, but could you elaborate for the communities that are living, why can't the Department of Defense clean up PFAS up to the most stringent standards, given the health implications?
Well, let me clarify, ma'am.
Of course.
So as part of the CERCLA process, the state standards do come in as part of the cleanup decision.
Right.
So when we get to the remedy selection, the state standards play an integral role in that remedy selection. So ultimately, it's called an ARR, applicable and relevant and I always get this wrong. The applicable and relevant required appropriate standards. So the state standard, the Michigan standard, will come in actually in the remedy selection when we get to that phase of the process. Absolutely.
Yeah, I understand that, but factoring it in and having to live by it are very different things. And in our experience of sort of these painstaking and somewhat painful negotiations on around some of our retired military bases in Michigan, you may have considered that standard, but not used it in the end. And we haven't seen any movement by the Department of Defense to do anything other than the EPA standard. So I guess my question is, wouldn't it just be easy enough to replace the EPA federal standard with the state standard, given that we are talking about people's health here? What's to prohibit us from doing that?
So let me distinguish 2 things. So one is the actual remedy, the cleanup, the long-term decision. We are not at that point in those sites in Michigan, and that's where it will come in. Where you're talking about is a decision point earlier in the process, which is called a removal action. The way the current CERCLA process works, it is unclear legally how those standards come in. So I'm trying to work through this with our general counsel to get a clarity in terms of that. But right now, the state standards come in at the remedy selection, the long-term solution. I need clarity from our attorneys on the issue of how it plays in a removal action, which happens much earlier in the process.
Yeah, and I do understand removal versus remediation. Right. And again, I understand the complications that this would cause the Defense Department to have to live by these different state standards, but we're only doing it out of sheer desperation because the EPA won't do their job and set a clearer standard that's based on science. So based on science, sir, if I can turn to you, and happy birthday, by the way. Michigan State University, which I represent, is one of the few PFAS research institutes in the country. Can you talk to us about what's needed on remediation? We know it's difficult. We know there's not a lot of answers. What would kickstart the investigation and support of remediation methods?
Well, I actually don't know that it needs a kickstart. I think we're starting to move some remediation methods out of CERTA, which would be the R&D, the laboratory scale, and maybe a small little plot in the backyard, out to installation. So we had a few successes. What is not so far successful is bioremediation. That's used a lot in other contaminants where there is you find some microbes that will help you break down the compounds. Since the carbon fluorine bonds and PFAS are very, very strong, it's really difficult to find candidates for bioremediation. So I guess I just answered the question without answering the question. Huh? If we could find make some more progress in bioremediation, I think this whole thing would go faster.
Thank you, and I know my time has expired. Thank you, Chairman, for yielding your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Slotkin.
I turned it off rather than on. Just for the benefit of everyone who's watching, PFAS refers to per- and polyfluorinated alkyl substances, and it's called PFAS for short. This question is for Dr. Nelson. In your written testimony, you state, quote, none of the commercially available PFAS-free foams meet the Department of Defense's strict safety standards to rapidly extinguish dangerous fuel fires and prevent their reignition during rescue operations," end quote. Are you confident the Department of Defense will be able to not only identify an effective PFAS-free foam, but also by 2024 install PFAS-free foams on all Department of Defense installations that use aqueous film forming foam? A lot of tongue twisters.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why people say AFFF instead of trying to say that whole nine. I don't know if confident is the right word, but quite optimistic. We're making good progress in the research program on identifying substances that can meet the extinguishment requirement. All the PFAS-free foams meet the reignition standard. So it's get the fire out and then keep it out while rescue people go in or something like that. So they all meet the reignition standard. They don't yet meet the 30 seconds for a 28 square foot gasoline fire. That's the qualification test for the military specification. Many of the PFAS-free foams can do it in 40 or 45 seconds. So we're making progress. We're not there yet.
Ms. Sullivan, this is for you. Our forces operate on several joint-use airports across the nation where they share firefighting responsibility with their civilian counterparts. How is that impacting the PFAS replacement effort, and can you give us some insight into the Department's collaboration with the Federal Aviation Administration or other federal agencies to address PFAS use in these cases?
Thank you, sir. It's actually quite a complicated situation because we have basically 4 types of joint-use airports where DoD provides all of the support, DoD provides partial support, provides minimal support, or none. Where we provide partial or minimal, we have to ensure whatever foam that we are in fact using is compatible with the foam that the commercial airport is providing, so that the foams can interact properly and don't discount each other. So we are working very closely with FAA on demonstration, validation, sharing test results to be able to make sure that the foams are in fact compatible. The other thing is we really need to be careful in terms of not going down a sole source type of airport foam. We need to have multiple types of foams so we have multiple sources and ensure how they can all interact together, while in fact continuing to support the level of protection that the airports need.
This question is for either one of you concerning PFAS alternatives that are now being looked at, researched, and developed. Has there been any environmental testing done of these alternatives to determine their level of risk compared to PFAS?
So we've just started that. Normally, of course, we would develop something that worked, and then we do environmental testing. Since we have the short deadline, we're having to do everything in parallel. So we have 6 projects started this fiscal year looking at the environmental impacts of these alternatives. So some of that effort's going to end up being wasted because we're having to test things that haven't quite proven themselves out yet in the firefighting, but that's what we've got to do to get this to go on. So I think that we are adequately covering that issue.
So if I could add to that, we're also, in addition to the work that Dr. Nelson's group is doing, we are partnering with the National Toxics Program to look at the human health aspects of these alternatives. That studying takes a lot of time, so we need to be patient and work with them. That's part of NIH, because that's their mission to look at human health.
Are there any early indicators as to whether these PFAS alternatives are going to be environmentally safer or more hazardous if used?
I think it's too early to answer that question. We're just getting started. Normally, on this day, I could give you some early indicators, but like everyone else on this earth, they've really taken a delay because of the COVID situation. Many of the people are out of their laboratories, so maybe they're 6 months further behind than we would expect them to be.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. A very good line of questions along the way. I will simply add one thing to your question about the 2024 deadline. I suspect there may be 1 or 2 of us in this room that did all of its work before the final exam, or did we wait till the final exam deadline? The deadlines are necessary for that purpose. a lot of work obviously needs to be done. Our next, let me run down the gavel order here. Horn, Stefanik, Houlihan, Slotkin. Back to Slotkin again. Ms. Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. I want to ask about our assessment and understanding of contamination, specifically in my district in home state, Tinker Air Force Base, which is right at the edge of my district and is incredibly important. We've seen 5 sites in Oklahoma City that have been identified to have PFAS in drinking water or groundwater, and 3 of these sites were military related. And with 7 bases across our state, 5 have had identified areas of contamination. And this question is for both of you. So what I'm trying to understand is that in the 2017 report, Secretary Sullivan, the 2017 report showed that Tinker had 73 to 170,000 points above the EPS, the EPS Health Advisory. But then there's also the March 2020 task force that claims that no one on or off base is drinking water above the EPA's level of 70 parts per trillion. So I know there's issues of cleanup and adjusting the foam, but what I'm trying to understand is those 2 things seem to be contradictory to me, that we've identified sources of contamination, but then there's another report that says they're not. So how do we address this?
Thank you, ma'am. Good question. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify. So let me distinguish groundwater versus drinking water. So what is really important is we may have identified the presence of these compounds, PFAS and PFOA, in the groundwater. That does not mean it is in the drinking water. Not all sources of groundwater are used as drinking water. There may be treatment processes in between the groundwater and the drinking water. So I want to make that distinction in terms of there may in fact be presence in the groundwater, but it's not in the drinking water. These are 2 separate tests. And I will point out that EPA only has an approved test method for drinking water. There is no approved test method for groundwater. We have identified 676 installations across the United States where we need to go and look. We are looking at every one of them. But I will say that we've been studying cleanup issues in groundwater around our bases for decades now. So we have a lot of information about the groundwater flows, which enables us to actually identify where we suspect it is in the drinking water outside the base and move quickly to do the testing. And if the water is above EPA's lifetime health advisory, we have the authority to act right away and work with either the private landowner or the municipality to treat the drinking water. So that's the distinction I would want to make. Where we know it's in the drinking water and we are in fact the DOD source, we're acting right away. The other sites, we're following the standard CERCLA process to do the full investigations.
Thank you, Dr. Rush. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, ma'am. I think
Okay.
she covered it pretty well.
Okay. A couple more questions. Actually, I want to change directions just a little bit and talk about our veterans and preparing the VA, because what we know is that we know about the implications of PFAS and PFOA contamination for the health of our current and former service members. And as I mentioned, 7 military installations in Oklahoma and 5 have tested positive for PFAS. And then there was a 2012 report that estimated about 750,000 veterans and family members qualified for filing a claim related to an incidents between 1953 and 1987. So my question is what we need to be doing to prepare for health impacts now for our veterans.
Most of that, ma'am, I'm going to have to defer to Dr. Rausch, who is not here today. But I can tell you one of the things I was very specific about in that we have done is we tested back in 2016 all of the drinking water that we provide on our bases, as well as working where we buy water. And all that information I've made sure is archived in our safety and occupational health databases. So we will have that data readily available for historic questions so people will know what the levels were now, We also just updated all our policies and are going to do another round of drinking water testing on all of our bases. Again, all that information will be readily archived and available for future use.
Thank you very much. And my time has expired, so I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Horn. Appreciate your work on this as well as your work on the housing issues. Enjoyed our visit to your district and where we went into both of these questions. Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Assistant Secretary Sullivan, in June of this year, the Department of Defense released the report titled Remediation Plan for Cleanup of Water Impacted by PFAS and PFAS. Within the report are outlined steps for DoD to investigate and clean up contaminated sites. I represent Fort Drum in the 10th Mountain Division in upstate New York, which has been identified as having PFAS detections on the installation. Can you provide an update on the status of DoD's remediation plan for the Fort Drum community? Great.
Too many things at once. Yes, the preliminary assessment site investigation is ongoing, and actually it's supposed to be completed in the first quarter of '21, so this coming fall. That collects all the information that they have, does some testing, and determines the levels of unacceptable risk that are in the community and what the path forward should be. Right now, the Air Force is predicting that it will go to the next step, which is a remedial investigation sometime in '21, which is a much more in-depth look, a lot of engineering, water modeling, data collection. So that is well on its way at Fort Drum.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Stefanik. Ms. Houlihan.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. I think that some of my questions are probably better served for Mr. Roach, Dr. Roach, so I'll start with what I can ask here today. One of the questions that I have follows along Mr. Brooks's line of question, and I'm intrigued because it sounds as though in an effort to find substitutes for PFAS, there's a concurrent, accelerated program ongoing where we're finding them, studying them, investigating their hazardousness, and it sounds an awful lot like what we're doing in response to COVID in terms of our rapid response plan for COVID vaccine. It sounds, for me, based on what you guys are talking about, that this is a relatively unique approach to a very acute problem that we're having. Is this a new idea to be effectively doing a warp speed project on something like PFAS?
So I would be loath to call it a new idea. It is not the normal way the department does it. Normally, we're much more staged approach to things. Obviously, in this case, we don't have the time to do that, so we're having to do things in parallel. Others have done this, of course.
Has there been any thought to sort of a post-mortem of sorts when we get to the point where we've passed the deadline, so to speak, when the term paper is due, to see if that accelerated approach has been more effective than not, or more cost-effective than not?
Actually, that's a great idea, yeah. I think it will turn out to be, there will be some inefficiencies. So we're going to study some compounds that are not going to make the final cut. So that's just what's going to happen when we do this quickly. But did we get there quicker? Is it net a good thing? That's a very good idea.
And also maybe some of the compounds that don't make the cut, maybe they make some other cut, they're useful for some other purpose.
Absolutely, and on that line, ESTCP, the demonstration programs, clearly aimed right at the deadline because we have to have something ready to go. The CERTA program, which is the R&D program, will continue on this, and there can be a generation 2, and a generation 3, and a generation 4 as we learn more things in the laboratory. So that won't stop when we get to the deadline.
Excellent. I think that maybe we should take a look at that together. I think it would be an interesting problem set to solve. My next question is also for you, Dr. Nelson, and you mentioned in your introduction some of the cross departments that you're working with. One of the things that I was able to introduce in this year's NDAA, was an Interagency Research Coordination Strategy Act to make sure that we are coordinating efforts across the federal government in addition to the DoD, but with others. So could you describe briefly what is going on to make sure that we are, the DoD's PFAS activities are integrated with other agencies, and if there are any challenges that you've encountered coordinating those activities?
I don't think we've encountered any challenges. My colleague, Andrea Leeson, who is the program manager for this particular area, convenes a periodic call with the people and all the other agencies that are supporting PFAS remediation. So we're talking about the remediation now. and they kick around what they're doing, what are the big problems they come up, and of course, we invite them to all of our workshops. The outputs of our workshops are generally a short, medium, and long-term research plan, so everybody gets to be involved in that, and we publish those on our website so that every agency can take a look at what we're going to do in the short, medium, and long term. So I think it's going on. It will be more formalized after this, if the provisions in the AA pass, that there'll be maybe a more structured approach, but it is going on informally. I think the same thing in AFFF. It's a pretty small community. There was this talk about communicating with FAA. One of our big investigators helped the FAA design their test facility at the Atlantic City Technical Center. So they're all really interconnected. FAA is just getting back to work from their COVID break. We've set up a call once a month with our 2 testing places at Tyndall Air Force Base and at the Naval Research Lab with the FAA Technical Center people so that everybody knows what they're doing, what they're getting ready to do. So I think at the working level, it's well coordinated.
Okay, and I look forward to seeing when it's more formalized what
Absolutely. Then it'll
synergies
be at a
that we
higher
find.
level, huh? And yeah.
And with the last minute of my time, I believe my questions are, as I mentioned, for Dr. Roach, but I'll put them out there in case you guys have something to add to them. I'm looking to understand what sort of measures, and this piggybacks on what Representative Horn was talking about, that we're doing to make sure that our military members, both existing and veterans, are continuing to have good health. And I'm specifically wanting to understand if there is any ongoing blood testing for military firefighters. Have you begun that testing? Will this testing include civilians as well as DoD firefighters?
It is Dr. Rausch's area, but I will answer. Yes, we will be starting in October to test all of the firefighters that work for DoD, both military and civilian. We've got all the protocols in place, the labs all certified, the fact sheets for both the clinicians and the firefighters, and so we're doing the final dotting the I's and crossing the T's to get all the instructions out, but it will start October 1st.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Houlihan. I believe it's time for a Republican question. Mel, do you have another question, series of questions?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I've just been handed one. This question is for both Dr. Nelson and Ms. Sullivan, so whoever wants to take it on, please feel free. My understanding is that incineration is the primary method used to dispose of PFAS materials during remediation and removal. Are you aware of any alternative methods that are mature enough and scalable enough to provide a viable alternative to incineration?
Sorry, I didn't know that was going to end up being for me. So no, I am not aware of any thing that meets the criteria you just outlined currently available. There are certainly things in the research program. The EPA, though, is conducting a study of all available destruction methods and are looking to provide some guidance by the end of the year, I believe. Don't maybe hold the EPA to my deadline, but shortly they're going to do that. So I think we in DoD will take guidance from this EPA study.
Yes, Dr. Nelson is right. We're looking for EPA to issue their guidance, which is due out by the end of this year in this area. But I will say that we have an ongoing need to dispose of streams coming from AFFF replacement, from the cleanup activities that we do have going on, from water treatment practices, that there is an ongoing stream of materials that has to be disposed of, just day-to-day operations that we need alternatives available to us.
Would the department have any concerns if it was required to stockpile PFAS?
This would be a significant challenge for the department. We do not have the space to store large amounts because we're in the process of changing out the legacy AFFF to the newer versions, which is a safer, more environmentally solution. And we would have to stockpile all of that material, take up valuable storage space. Plus, we have ongoing waste that's being generated associated with these remedial actions that we're taking, soils, waters from dewatering at construction sites. There's a lot of day-to-day waste streams that are being generated just to meet what we have today. We don't have the space on military installations to store all that material. It would require us to stop certain activities.
Dr. Nelson, do you have anything to add?
No, sir, I think that covered it.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. My understanding is our remaining Republican colleagues will be here in a few minutes, and so we're going to keep this rolling along until they come, because I know that they also have questions, and we would like to have their questions on the record and the information available. In the meantime, it's my turn for questions. First of all, I want to thank our colleagues and the witnesses for the questions and the answers that we've received thus far. There are just an overarching strategy that this committee is employing and has employed for the last 3 to 4 years. And that is, we don't know the answers, but we're going to get the answers. We don't know exactly what PFAS and PFOA does to the human body and to the ecosystem. We don't know exactly what the toxicity to the ecosystem is. And therefore, we're going to keep the pressure on until the answers are forthcoming. We do know that there is contamination. We don't know what the appropriate maximum level of exposure is, or the longevity in which that exposure would take place. However, we're going to do everything we can to find out those answers, which means keeping the pressure on the department to search for the answers. Within the Congress and the Senate, we have our own problem. There's a jurisdictional issue. And what this committee wanted to do, we've not been able to do in the NDAA for jurisdictional issues with other committees. However, we'll work our way through that problem, but I want to note that is a problem, one that has retarded much of what we would want to do in the NDAA. Nevertheless, we do expect to continue process. So my first question goes to the overall intensity and way in which the department is addressing the issue. Do you have the necessary authorities and money to carry out the tasks that have presently been assigned to you? We'll start with Ms. Sullivan and then Dr. Nelson.
I would say the department is really focused on this, that we are putting all of the attention. We have the task force that is chaired by the Assistant Secretary of Defense for sustainment and includes the 3 assistant secretaries of the military departments. They meet every other week to go through all the things that are on the list that we have to address. We've issued multiple policies and directions. We're collecting tremendous amount of data and setting the standards pretty high for our folks to address. They range everything from drinking water to firefighting, testing blood, to wastewater, to cleanup standards, to AFFF replacement. We're covering the whole gamut, including what we're doing overseas. So I think there's a lot of attention being focused on this. I will say, to me, the biggest challenge is going to be the resources that we need to do the AFFF replacement. To fully understand where we have, it's not just the air rescue firefighting vehicles that are on the flight line, which we have a lot of, but it's all the facilities, all the hangars, all the fuel infrastructure, all of the hazardous storage facilities where we have AFFF systems installed, fully understanding the scope of that and what it is going to take to actually change out those systems. In addition to the cleanup, we have to be able to grapple with that. That's the cost and the workload of that is an unknown that we really have to understand and fully be prepared to.
Given
address.
that problem, in your research for a replacement, are you taking into account and directing that research in a way that could utilize the existing infrastructure? Is that your priority, or are you just searching the world and all the encyclopedias to figure it out?
So there are multiple responses to that. We're looking at not just a FFF replacement for facilities, that there are other firefighting solutions that don't involve foam. And so we have a pretty wide aperture of solution sets that we're looking at. But as Dr. Nelson mentioned, one of the big things is if we can clean the insides of the equipment, we won't have to replace it. And so that's why we're doing that parallel investment in cleaning the equipment. So it won't require us to replace large infrastructure with facilities or with the trucks, the inside, what I call the guts of the truck, in order to provide. So to try and get ahead of this problem so that when we do have a solution that comes forward, that we can do a drop-in and minimize the disruption in the process.
Dr. Nelson, would you like to expand on those?
I think Ms. Sullivan covered it pretty completely. Obviously, it is the big unknown is how much we have to replace in equipment, and a lot of our work is trying to get some numbers next to that so we can write down on a piece of paper what it's going to actually cost to do this changeover. As to this, you sort of brought up a drop-in replacement. You know, you're trying to find something to just go in the current equipment, and of course that's the gold standard. If we could find something that we take out the old, wash it, put in the new, we're all in good shape. That may not happen. But we're looking at, and as part of our demonstration program, we're really trying to expand the horizon of variables. What happens if you up the pressure a little bit in the tanks? What happens if you use a different nozzle? And then we'll present all of that to the fire protection people, and then they will make their decision on what they need, knowing what's the impact of higher temperature, higher pressure, bigger nozzles, whatever.
In the current legislation, the current NDAA, we're providing more money and a prize for some brilliant person or group out there that can figure this out. What do you make of that?
I'm quite hopeful of that. You may know that right now the EPA is running a prize for PFAS destruction. We're co-sponsoring that with them, and the way I think of it is there are a lot of clever people in this country. We know a lot of them, but we don't know them all. So this is a way to get some people that aren't familiar with our problems and that we're not familiar with their work to get involved in this. So I think it's a good idea.
There's a series of questions that have already been asked. I want to go into them a little further, and that has to do with the exposure, existing and past exposure, that firefighters and others have had to the AFFF chemicals. We required last year that blood testing take place. What else is the department doing to protect first responders from ongoing exposure?
Actually, sir, I'm going to have to defer to Dr. Rausch's organization. They have occupational health and exposure. I don't have that in my portfolio any longer, sir.
We note that Dr. Rausch, in his written testimony, speaks to this generally. Unfortunately, I'm going to go back and beat this drum one more time. I think it is extremely foolish for the administration to prohibit testimony in formal hearings from witnesses that cannot or should not appear in person. So we will have to ask a written question of Dr. Rausch about that issue. Dr. Nelson, if you'd like to expand on that, you're welcome to do so.
No, that's really outside of my area of expertise. It would not make much sense for me to discuss that.
I thought it might be, but one never knows what might be hidden somewhere.
Well,
in
good
your,
try, but different kind of
brain.
doctor.
One of the purposes for the blood tests. Okay, one of the purposes for the blood testing is to establish a foundation of data and information. That fits with another law that is in the last year's NDAA and expanded this year, that the military keep records, personnel records, and health records of every individual who is exposed to known chemical contaminants, from the fire pits in Iraq to PFAS going forward. All right, so that probably fits in with it. I understand Mr. Lamborn is on his way. I do have another set of questions. I mentioned that this committee has jurisdictional issues with other committees, at least two. Transportation infrastructure, specifically the FAA, and the Commerce Committee, who has EPA. We have our own issues. I want to question both of you about the ongoing work within the administration, the coordination. You've spoken to coordination with EPA and FAA. What I'm interested in are problems, stop signs, or other kinds of problems that may exist as a result of authorities. That is, the laws and the regulations that exist. Your ability to work with them, is it in any way retarded by a lack of authority to allow for the coordination? Ms. Sullivan?
I think right now we are closely coordinated with EPA. We are waiting on several things from them that they're required to provide, such as the disposal guidance document that they need to get out, which would help us tremendously in our disposal guidance that we're required to get out. I think the challenge is continuing to make sure that we all stay current on everything that's going on. I think we defer to EPA on a number of things, and we look to them to be a source. We're looked to be a source on toxicity values, on guidance on discharge standards and things like that, test methods. Right now, the only approved, EPA-approved test methodology is for drinking water. We don't have approved test methods that the EPA has sanctioned for groundwater, for soil, for stormwater. These present challenges to us while we move forward, and we continue to work with them to come up with, support them to come up with these standards so they can, in fact, help us as we proceed through our cleanup program.
Dr. Nelson?
So I would echo that. I don't think we have much coordination issues. We fund some projects at the EPA working on these kind of issues. All of our projects that I talked about earlier are selected and managed by what we call a technical committee, and since EPA is one of the partner agencies, EPA has representatives on these. So they help us select projects, they help us put together our call for proposals, identify the issues. So I think we're quite well coordinated with them. We've sort of made the FAA people sort of an ad hoc member of those committees for the purposes of this problem. So at the technical level, we work quite well with the FAA people also, so I don't see any barriers.
My questions, this particular set of questions is driving at the authorities that exist. Ms. Sullivan, you mentioned three of them just a moment ago, having to do with drinking water, of which there is a standard, and for contamination, for which there is not a standard. This is less for the administration, but rather for us in Congress, that we work amongst ourselves and the committees to close authority gaps. For example, where the EPA may not have the authority to do something that is necessary to deal with the AFFF or the PFAS, PFOA. So that's what I'm looking at, is how information we need to work with our committee, our other committees, to carry it out. You spoke to EPA, Ms. Sullivan. How about the FAA?
Well, let me, can I touch EPA
I would simply
first?
say, as a member of the TNI, the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, and the FAA, or the subcommittee, there's a problem.
So FAA's deadline, their requirements are different than ours. They have a 21 deadline, and so that is a challenge. We are working very closely together because right now, for an airport to be certified, I've learned this so much I can't tell you. They have to have, right now, it requires them to use the mil spec in order to meet the certification. That requirement will go away come October 2021, so it won't be mandated. That leaves a free-for-all on types of what foams these airports are going to do. We're mutually concerned about that, and we are actually actively talking about, well, what is the standard? What level of support? So there's a lot of work to be done there. I can say one of the EPA things that I want to make sure that we understand, there seems to be some confusion or a common belief that because EPA has not declared PFAS or PFOA hazardous substance under CERCLA, that federal agencies can't do anything. Because of the separate section 104 under CERCLA, federal agencies already have an affirmative responsibility to move forward, unlike anybody else across the nation. So we, the federal family, are already proceeding under CERCLA where nobody else is across the nation. These are the challenges that we have to say. You mentioned drinking water. It's a non-enforceable standard. We are testing all of our drinking water on our bases because we're concerned citizens for our service members, of families, our civilian workforce. Again, we look to EPA to what that standard should be across the nation.
This set of issues is really important in that the solutions are going to be difficult to find and to certainly enforce if there is this ambiguity that you've described in at least two different places. I'm asking our staffs, Doug, your staff, my staff, to go into this in detail. We've known from our previous efforts on this area that there is this jurisdictional issue within our domain. And we're going to need to work our way through that so that the administration is required by law to coordinate and to have a similar standard across the, in this case, FAA, EPA, and the Department of Defense. So I've taken up well more than 5 minutes of Ms. Slotkin's time. Awaiting your arrival, Doug. I know that you're over at the White House for a very important event, and so if you'd like to take your 5 minutes to talk about the event, you're welcome to do so, or you can go to your questions. Thank you for coming back to join us.
Well, I'll go to the questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing, for keeping things moving along. I want to thank Representative Brooks for sitting in till I got here. I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony, and I do have a little bit of follow-up. Representative Brooks asked some of what was concerning me, but just a little bit more follow-up, and then I'll turn the time back. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your dedication on this and the other logistical and environmental and readiness issues that we get to work on.
We don't do that by ourselves, do we? We do it across the aisle.
That's right. We work together, and we've got great staff who help us in so many ways. Thinking about the CERCLA standards and what would happen if states stepped in and had a more stringent, I won't say higher or lower, but a more stringent, a stricter standard. Are there risks if DOD had to comply with a state standard that was out of sync with the other 49 states? Is there any kind of risk where that state standard may not be relevant or appropriate? Just a little more detail. I know we've touched on this earlier, but Ms. Sullivan, we could start with you on this.
Sure. The CERCLA process, the cleanup process, has been long established. We've been working under this law for decades now. State standards come in. This is something we do day to day, whether it be PFAS, PFOA, arsenic, trichloroethylene. We're used to dealing with the state standards. So it does come in. There's a whole process of how it comes in to the CERCLA process when we get to a remedy selection. So we are already addressing it across the nation. So we will, in fact, every situation, every decision is site-specific. That remedy selection is site-specific. In the cleanup program, this is what we do business day to day. In drinking water, it's a little bit different. In drinking water, the standards, first of all, where we're the purveyor, where the military installation actually provides the drinking water, yes, we will follow the state standard under the Safe Drinking Water Act. We've been doing that across the nation with all sorts of other presents, all sorts of other chemicals. Where it becomes more of a challenge is drinking water off bases that may have been impacted by the Department of Defense. Right now, our legal authorities are somewhat confusing. We're trying to work through them, and that's where the biggest challenge is in my mind.
If you had to give, if a state standard was so stringent that maybe it's out of line with what science has said or EPA has said is necessary, is there a risk there that that stringent standard could impose?
It could be precedent setting. So part of the process is there has to be a promulgation process that the state has to go through in order to be qualified to be considered. So that's part of the process as well. So that if the process that the state went through to actually issue that standard is looked at, as well as the science behind it, to determine if it's applicable and relevant to be included as a cleanup standard.
So it has to be applicable and relevant?
Yes.
Okay. So if it's too much of an anomaly, there's a way out?
It depends on the science and the process that they used.
Okay. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, thank you for having my opening statement read into the record by unanimous consent. I'll highlight one thing, and that is the city of Fountain is near Peterson Air Force Base and is maybe the first or one of the first communities in the country to be impacted by this and to realize, hey, we've got an issue here we have to work on. So I want to commend the people of the city of Fountain that they jumped in and they're doing everything they can, but they do have limited resources. So that's why the Air Force and the DOD is a necessary partner in making sure that this problem is resolved and overcome for the people of Fountain. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lamborn. I note that one of our committee members has joined us. Ms. Holland is on remote. And Ms. Holland, you had some questions, so it is your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for convening today's panel. This issue affects communities across our country, including at Kirtland Air Force Base, which is in my district. And all three bases in New Mexico have to deal with the consequences of the continued use of PFAS, including the community and farmers surrounding Cannon Air Force Base. New Mexicans deserve clean water to raise their families, grow their businesses, and support agriculture, but harmful chemicals have taken a toll on our communities. I've seen what happens to the health of families and friends when toxic sites are not cleaned up, and it's not something that we should risk. PFAS presents a clear and present danger to our children, to our farmers, and environment as a whole. Yet in response to the requirement in last year's NDAA for the Department of Defense to provide its plan to clean up PFAS, all that was produced was an anemic 7-page document explaining the Superfund cleanup process. That report doesn't help my constituents. It doesn't help the hardworking farmers in my state worried about their livestock being contaminated or struggling New Mexico families or children growing up with a host of health problems that we don't even fully understand yet. You're hoping that by the end of fiscal year 2022, 96% of the installations where PFAS was released will have completed only the first step of the cleanup process, ignoring the two or so dozen, installations that won't even make it that far. You then move on to the next step that takes anywhere from 3 to 6 years before even starting to address the contamination. And Secretary Sullivan is present, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. Secretary Sullivan, if this committee told you that in anywhere from 3 to 10 years will fund or otherwise address concerns that the Pentagon raised in its appropriations request you sent us in the spring, would that be helpful?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I apologize. If you could clarify.
Ms. Holland,
Yeah.
the sound system is not particularly good. Please repeat your question,
Yeah.
and we'll see if we can pick it up here.
Okay, I apologize. Is that a little better?
Yes.
Okay. If this committee told you that anywhere from 3 to 10 years that we would fund or otherwise address concerns that the Pentagon raised in its appropriations request that you sent us in the spring, would that be helpful?
Right now, from my perspective, the money that Congress has so generously provided us has enabled us to really make tremendous progress in the cleanup program. Let me make it perfectly clear that our priority has been drinking water. If we in fact know that drinking water has been impacted by Department of Defense activities, we have all the tools in place, all the funding in place, the authorities in place to be able to address that immediately. And we continue to thank the members for their support to do that. The cleanup process is complicated. It takes time to be able to do all of the analysis and studying, really to understand water flows, to understand the engineering, to understand how the fate and transport process works, to be able to design the solution. You want to make sure you have all the information in place, in hand, so that you're designing the right solution up front and you don't have to go back and repeat work.
Thank you for that answer. One last question, Ms. Sullivan. Secretary Sullivan, you previously testified it could take 30 years to clean up the PFAS that has been confirmed. If PFAS is also confirmed at the sites where such contamination is now suspected, how much longer will cleanup take?
Well, it's really hard to say how long cleanup will take because it's going to be dependent on a lot of site-specific circumstances. That's why it's so important the work that Dr. Nelson and his team is doing to see if there are alternatives that will actually enable us to work on addressing the cleanup. Remember, there's cleanup of groundwater, there's cleanup of soil, there's all sorts of aspects. We have really good solutions for drinking water, but we really need to work on more efficient and effective measures to treat groundwater, to treat soil, and see if we can accelerate that process in any way. But again, it's going to be site-specific how long that solution is going to take and the specific circumstances at that site.
Chairman, it looks like my time is up, and so I will yield.
Ms. Holland, thank you so very much for joining us remotely. Look forward to additional questions. The members and Mr. Lamborn and I may have written questions that we would want to submit for the record, and we'll do so. There are a couple of things here that I want to just pick up that we've talked about the disposal. Ms. Sullivan, you just spoke to that issue. There are contaminated soils, water, and so forth. The use of incineration has been discussed as a way of dealing with it. There is incineration, and then there is incineration. Pyrolysis, for example, super high temperatures, other things. With regard to those incineration, very broadly defined, are all of those types of incineration being considered?
Yes, they all are in the research program. So you completely correctly outlined it. There's incineration, there's incineration. These are very stable compounds, which means they take higher temperatures and longer times to break down than many of the contaminants we do. So we've moved a number of projects from the lab to pilot scale work. Among them are things like plasma destruction, which is higher energy, smoldering combustion, which is pretty high temperature but longer time. So we're trying to get at one of those two, either higher temperatures or longer time. And so we're now testing them at realistic sites to see how they do. Of course, one issue in these things is we have to get down to very, very low levels at the end of this. You know, these compounds are hazardous at a very low level. So we can't have 99.9% destruction. We've got to have 5 nines or 4 nines or some number like that. So that complicates the issue, but we've got some hopeful technology. We've got some technologies that we have hope for.
Well, the PFAS and PFOAs are not the only chemicals.
Oh, exactly, and
that
that is part of what the problem is. Huh? They can break down into something that's equally hazardous. It's halfway to destruction. So we have to not, and even larger contaminants can break down to PFAS and PFOA during the destruction process. So it's this whole cascading chain, through the hundreds or thousands of these compounds. So yeah, we're definitely alive to that. We don't want to make PFAS or PFOA go away and something else hazardous show up.
The chairman of this committee has an intense interest in these destructive technologies, having worked on it since the 1990s, when I suspect Ms. Sullivan and I were interacting at that time on some of these questions. Before we adjourn here, just a couple of heads up to the department. This committee and the full committee, in fact, the entire Congress and Senate, have been working on PFAS issues at least since 2016 legislation. And I suspect before that there was, without specific focus, this issue was out and about and being discussed. We're not going to let it go. We're picking it up again in this year's NDAA with several advancements in the law, as well as the authorities and the funding. And so we will continue to press this issue in the conference committee. We have every reason to believe that the Senate is aligned with us on these issues. So we will carry out with additional requirements and as well as funding. There is an issue within the Congress itself, and I know this issue exists over in the Senate, and that has to do with authorities. I've spoken to that transportation infrastructure, FAA, and energy and commerce with regard to EPA. So we're going to, and we also have the Resources Committee involved in some of these issues also. It is important for us to know where we bump up against the interagency authorities. And so a question for the record to all three of our witnesses is, where are the interagency problems that prevent appropriate and timely resolution of those problems? They may very well be law or authorities or funding issues. I'd like to know so that I can work with the other committees to resolve our side of the issues and align the authorities in such a way that the administration is able to overcome whatever barriers may exist. So for the record, please provide us with that information. We've talked about funding here. We will plus up again this year. The authorities and I believe the appropriations committees will follow along to address that. I think all of us are very concerned about the replacement for the AFFF. We understand the complexities. We understand the potential cost associated with something that is entirely different. And that'll come back to roost in this committee. So we'll want to be aware of that. We do have a problem, and that is that, Ms. Sullivan, you are retiring without permission from this committee. We recognize that you've been at this some 40 years, and we know that you are just an enormous wealth of information, not only about the details of what these complex issues are, the science, the chemistry, and the like, but perhaps even more important, the way in which the organizations function successfully. That's because you know where they function unsuccessfully, and you're able to work your way through that. That's an incredible resource that we will be losing, at least in your formal role. We do have your identification numbers, and we may use the services of the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance efforts of the department to reach out to you and put you on a temporary contract and make use of your extraordinary knowledge. We will miss you. We thank you for those 40 years of service to America and to the world, because it has been on the environment for 40 years. It's an incredible, incredible task, and we thank you for that.
That's right.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you, sir.
With that, I think we have completed our hearing, and we are adjourned.